Now, the present research, as you can imagine, served in this context, it served merely as a means to validate predetermined paradigms. And what were the predetermined paradigms of a polarized and conflict-ridden society? But there was also a marked tendency to seek what we call as convenience samples, where you go to locations where you can easily access the kind of respondents who fit your research requirements, be it crowded markets, shopping arcades, train stations, wholesale vegetable markets, and so on. Now, my problem is where most respondents who were recruited belong to a certain the same social background. And by social, I mean their religious and linguistic profiles were all the same. And they served as data points to corroborate predetermined paradigms. And I wonder if the study conclusions would have been different if the sample had varied members and if they had belonged to different religious groups. The second problem that happens when you have this sort of a team is where they lead respondents to desired responses. And this is where the real test of ethics happens, when data contradicts the scholar's accepted beliefs. And we call these as deviant data. And I refer to an instance of deviant field data. And that caught my attention because I was working alongside my co-researcher, who was a European. He had a working knowledge of Hindi, and he was all set to complete his doctoral research in a renowned American academic institute. And alongside that, he was also a faculty in another research organization. So the said co-researcher, he was at that time looking to combine his doctoral research questions with that of the project which we were involved in. Now, this is the instance. He asked a participant, and she belonged to a particular demographic background, and you will know what I'm getting at. So he asked her if she had participated in a campaign against the government in her state, and she answered in the negative. So he again asked her if she would have joined if her religious head had asked for it, had commanded for it, either on the mass media or social media. To that again, she answered in the negative. Then he asked her if she had ever felt, quote unquote, if she had ever felt threatened by members of the majority religion. And she responded yet again in the negative. So to this, my colleague asked, now he changed his track a bit, and he asked her, again, quote unquote, how you might feel if you're threatened by members of the majority religion in the future. So at the end of that interview, I asked my colleague the reason for his persistence to obtain an affirmative sort of a response to religious tension in the region. And his obvious answer was, I'm trying to tease out the problem as an outsider. So I remarked that our research mandate was to gather personal experience of people. And, besides as a non-Indian academic, interacting with rural Indians, one had to be mindful of, projecting dominant constructs or coming across as being not just having, a preconceived sort of an idea, but also coming across as being aggressive. So the response was, again, quote unquote, he said, they don't reveal unless they are pushed to a point, they being the respondents. And yes, so the sheer absence of ethicality and sensitivity in pushing people to reveal by resorting to questionable, supplementary questions from the irrefutable space of an outsider became very apparent. And also not to forget that the nature of these questions were both value added and hypothetical. So, this obviously gave rise to what we call a subliminal messaging. Subliminal messaging is a strategy that is used to elicit responses in a manner that is preferred by the researchers. So subtle suggestions of religious sentiments, feelings of threat, insecurity, they were all planted as doubts and ideas in the respondents' head and to maneuver their responses. And this also, let me draw your attention to the fact that these were open-ended interviews, which were over an hour long. More, it took beyond an hour, and the influence of fatigue and lack of vigilance on the part of respondents, along with this sort of invasive interviewing, really cannot be discounted. So that was the other factor. Then another thing I want to draw your attention to is what we call as misreading field observations. So there are ethics and predispositions of researchers that affect the research design to a large extent. And so it can not only be seen in the way the sample is drawn, but also, as we saw during data gathering, but it also impacts data analysis. Now, analysis in phenomenological studies, like our qualitative ethnographic study, is what we call as primarily hermeneutical, which is based on the researcher's interpretation, researcher's worldview. So pretty much dependent on the perception, frame of reference, and the ideological base of the researcher. Now, in the present study that that I was involved in, the hermeneutics of the senior researcher during analysis and that of the language translators and field assistants during respondent interactions, all of them had a cumulative impact. In fact, some of the interviews were delegated to field assistants, and they brought in their additional layers of complexity in the manner of construing discussions with respondents and how they transmitted it to the senior scholars. So I just want to recount one of my interactions with one particular field assistant. She was all set to complete her undergraduate program of humanities from a well-known Indian university. And she was at this time planning to send her completed applications to two of the major American universities. And two of these were the same universities that these co-researchers of mine were already employed in as faculty. And she had discussions with them on the most persuasive socio-cultural theme to pursue in India and write up about as a statement of purpose for her research. Now, this field assistant was sent to one particular study location, and the study was pretty much to understand the interactions at the PDS outlet, PDS meaning public distribution services. That is your ration shop and the ration shop owner, and that of the beneficiaries who can avail of these PDS services. And while she was explaining her latest findings, she said that a staff member had refused to give ration to some of the people because they were not, quote unquote, they were not from the dominant religious community as the staff member. So then I looked at the transcripts that were shared by her, and religious identity had not been mentioned as an issue by any of the respondents. So to gain further clarity, I asked this FA, the field assistant, to engage in discussions with other members of the user group, but who had been given PDS supplies. And I said that let them also be from the same social demographic section as the ones who you claim were not handed over the PDS supplies. So in addition, other field researchers also joined her on the ground. Now, after a week's immersion, a significant trend began to emerge. So it became obvious that more members of the user group in the location, they belong to the same religious community, right, as the previous respondents. But there was a difference here. They had migrated to this location years ago, unlike the previous respondents who were recent migrants. And over time, they had built informal trust with the staff member, and he knew them well. So they managed to obtain ration supplies from him, even in the absence of ration cards. So it was so these were respondents who were from the same religious community, as I said, and there were others from a different religious community who had not been similarly given ration supplies because they were also recent migrants. So you understand, it became evident that religion was not critical to obtaining PDS supplies in this context. It was more about maintaining and leveraging trust with and shared context with the PDS shop owner. So, these translators had been, the other thing to remember is it's not just field assistants who had their layer of complexity, as I, like this example as I gave you. There were field translators who were also employed, and this was for locations that the researchers did not know the local language of. And they had been also debriefed by the donor agency and the international research agency. And they said, give us cues on caste, gender, conflict and all that, and we can work with that, just quickly as a last minute thing. So in that context, I want to give you another example. There was a long interview that had just been about to be concluded with a co-researcher of mine, along with a rural respondent, and there was a field translator as well. I happened to be present in that location, and unfortunately I didn't know the local language, because this was in one of the states of India that I was not too familiar with. And so the field translator was asked by us to check with the respondent that since it was getting a little late, whether she would be okay to just extend her interaction with us for a little more time. So the respondent was asked, and then she declined. She declined, stating that her boat, which was to ferry her from the town's marketplace back to her village, would leave in a bit, and so she was in a hurry. So guessing from the body language, we kind of picked up that she was in a hurry, and we asked the translator to tell us exactly what she said. So the translator said, she has to leave because her husband did not want her to be delayed. And so there were additional reasons obviously ascribed by the translator. And I got to know this only when a professional transcriber agency shared the interview transcripts with me in English, and where obviously there was no mention of the husband calling her and asking her to leave and all that. So what happens is findings are condensed for an academic audience. They're modified from a respondent's description of an event to the researcher's interpretive description. So these are all the different ways in which a foreign researcher agency and researchers can really influence data and research itself.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.